the issue of what do we believe needs to happen in order to engender good governance. What fundamental things do we need to focus on?
Systems and processes as opposed to policy.
And obviously these proposals that we've put forward, these three pillars, from my perspective, I may say this, I've been engaged in this process almost within months of becoming an MHK in 2010, when it seemed obvious to me that there were flaws in the system that needed to be resolved, and I spent a lot of my time talking about these things. We still haven't done it, and I think the issue of those refinements to our system are getting more and more urgent, and they emanate from three things. First, I believe there's a growing sense the connection between the electorate and the government is not what it was, that a democratic process has weakened. I could speak to you about 2 hours over that, but the second thing is government keeps getting bigger and no longer lives within its budget, and it's been talking to that issue now remorselessly for years, but nothing ever happens. You know, we've been saying, oh, we've got to become more efficient and more productive here or there, but it hasn't happened. And it's a very dangerous thing that a government continues to live beyond its budget year after year, particularly in the world we're now in, where there's geopolitical strains and concerns, there's worries about the broader Western economic situation, and it'll all wash up on the shores of the Isle of Man. And my belief is one of the biggest defences that we should have is to make sure that we live within our means. And the third major issue is that major projects have consistently gone wrong. They fail completely to go well. They go catastrophically over budget again and again, and look, frankly, sort of amateurish in their delivery. And we complain after the event. We become wise with hindsight, but we need to be wise before it starts. So the three issues that we focused on then are the democratic process, the efficiency and productivity of government, and the importance of high-level strategic thinking. And as I say, I've placed this little paper before you, trying to identify the problems, and in each case proposed a solution. And I very much welcome the opportunity to be questioned on those principles.
Thank you. Would you be happy for us to publish on the website the evidence that you provided as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. So I want to kind of like sort of dig into government and parliament a little bit. A number of the evidence sessions that we've had, this has come up quite frequently, that when the ministerial system had changed, there was more than just government that was the focus of that. It's very much sort of the Latimer House principles as well as it just being government. So I'll start with Mr. Ramsay. You wrote in your submission that the answer to the imbalance between Parliament and the Executive is to strengthen the former rather than weaken the latter. Would you provide an explanation for what you meant by that?
I think there's a temptation to see the problem as being, you know, ministerial collective responsibility. The Council of Ministers is too strong. My argument is that if you weaken that, you would kind of go back towards the old board system. I think the answer is to make the parliamentary side stronger, so that you've got a better kind of system of checks and balances.
And what kinds of things would you suggest that we look at that?
I think limiting departmental memberships. I think I would see Legislative Council as the primary kind of scrutiny body, so I wouldn't have any departmental memberships on LegCo, accepting that some MLCs are very useful in departments. But I think that you need a body of people who are detached from the inside of government, so they've got that perspective on what's going on.
What do you think on that, Mr. Robertshaw?
Well, I am sympathetic to those observations that Alistair's brought forward. I think the elected politician is now currently the MHKs I'm speaking about now, the directly publicly elected representatives. They're in an increasingly weak position, and particularly if you compare it to the old board system, which I'm not suggesting we go back to. The value and influence of an individual MHK prior to 1986 was certainly much more significant than the situation we find ourselves in now. I think the role of the Council of Ministers and the individual members of Keys itself have all been weakened because the pendulum of influence has swung over to the individual departments. And I think this is self-evident on the way the voting system works, that you can have 5 out of 9 ministers vote for something and it turns into 9 votes. You can have a minister on their own in the department with members in opposition to the way the minister wants to take it. The likelihood is the minister will go in a direction that the CEO is comfortable with, so that might be 1 vote for and another 3 against. You can actually arrive on the floor of Tynwald, where there's 12 votes there, or 11 votes anyway, certainly, there, with almost a minority that may actually be for it. Now that's not healthy at all. It also undermines the opportunity for those who wish to oppose to do so, because they know actually, as long as it goes to the Council of Ministers, it's going to go through Keys, through Tynwald, through Tynwald, and it's weakened the value of and contribution from a member who wishes to oppose. Not at all healthy. So I'm actually in agreement with Alistair, where I think departments should have a minister and somebody else to stand in the event of that minister being on holiday or sick or whatever. But I believe passionately that, and this is where we come to the concept of efficiency and productivity. I think when we were determined that the ministerial system represented a collective of 8 individual legal entities, that effectively put us in a particularly difficult position, because everything had to end up in a department. So the departments became sort of clumsy collectives or conglomerates of a variety of different functions. If you had a single umbrella unified government, it means that Tynwald and Keys and members, you could decide to put things in different places. You could refine the departments down to very much more focused on their principal role. Just an easy one. Desk, for example, Department of Education, Sport and Culture. Department of Education should be a Department of Education. It should be totally focused on education, and it's adequate to have a Director of Education. What we've actually got is a funny organisation, Department of Education, Sport and Culture, which then has us in a position where we have a CEO over the Director of Education, and the Department of Education, Sport and Culture becomes this sort of conglomerate. If you had a situation where you had a unified government and an overarching umbrella, you would just simply take sport and culture out, head them up with probably a part-time board. Doesn't necessarily have to be highly paid, but totally focused all the time on the sport and culture elements, so that there would be a member in Tynwald that would represent them and take the sport and culture views forward directly and specifically. And that member representing that particular interest would not arrive in Tynwald with a majority. It would be almost like taking us back to the board system, where the representative of a board would have to fight their cause in Tynwald and would have to win the majority of the members over in that circumstance. the advantage of simplifying the departments by taking all these peripheral things away and giving them separate identities would be that it would allow examination of that simplified department in a much more detailed way, so that we could truly identify the economies that are required, the efficiencies that we need to achieve, and the productivity that we need to find. So at the same time, you open up the opportunity to improve efficiency and productivity, and at last have a leverage on this issue of, well, you know, we've got to cut cost. I think this clumsy Treasury pressure downwards on what needs to happen is quite the wrong way round. That's again clumsy, and this application of, well, your budget will be so much on these conglomerates. That's why we can't get anywhere. That's why we can't grip the individual issues and get on with them. So, I mean, the obvious contender for early deliberation is DOI. It's absolutely extraordinary. There's an organisation that is responsible for so many direct operational things that affect the lives of the people of the Isle of Man, is also responsible for these very high level project developments. And the result is that they keep failing. I mean, the brilliant, I could give you examples of all the situations that through the years I've observed, but the most remarkable one was the situation where a department was responsible for a high level strategic issue, brought it to Tynwald, and it just collapsed when one of the committees that I sat on looked at it. And it was an £80 million project called the Harbour Strategy that came to Tynwald, that was presented by this is fact, it's all Hansard, it's all there for you to look at if you want to. Brought an £80 million project. DOI said to Tynwald, said to the members of Tynwald, this project gets the support of our consultants. And almost to a man and woman, Tynwald voted for that project, £80 million. The Policy Review Committee called in the director of Royal Haskinen. He came over and we said, how did this happen? And he said, well, we were invited by DOI to critique a A3 drawing. Now I'm telling you the fact here. A3 drawing, not to start again, not to alter it, just to offer a critique of it. My second question was, well, I think it was a bloke called Mr. Davis. I said, Mr. Davis, if you had been invited in at the beginning and asked to work with government on the concept of a future strategy for harbours, would you have done this? He said no. And everybody died with embarrassment. And that plan, which had already been passed by Tynwald, £80 million vote, has now been lost in a dusty drawer in the back of DOI somewhere. Now, I could go on to lots of others, but that alone shows that the operating departments responsible directly for a lot of services cannot be expected to deliver high-level strategic concepts to Tynwald, but that's what we ask of it. It's not fair. It's not fair to operating departments to do this. It's not fair to members. In all these things that you have to consider in Tynwald, you're getting everything through the lens of the department. And that the lens of that department, that the operation of that department is filtering and defining and designing things and then presents you with a fait accompli. But you as members have got a myriad of things to consider. Can you necessarily focus on them to the degree that you need to, along with all the other things? Whether you're a minister or whether you're a member, you've got the same problem. And so it's a yes-no on a principle, a fait accompli that's presented. It might well be that in the process of defining and designing a project of significance that a particular department wants to place in front of Tynwald, that they are applying a bias to a project that never gets the chance to be considered in a broader basis. So the future Isle of Man process separates off two things. First of all, it says, how do we link our parliament, how do we link our parliament better with the electorate? And there we introduce the concept of a referenda. Now, they've got to be carefully applied. They can only be advisory. They cannot be statutory, because ultimately Tynwald is the highest court in the land, and it must decide. And if on occasion it decides on an item which is chosen for a referendum consideration that it doesn't agree, then Tynwald would have to go against a referendum and then explain itself to the people.
And just on that point, if I can just deviate ever so slightly on that point, I mean, Mr. Ramsay, you've spent an awful lot of time working in the communications division and heading that up.
I didn't head it up, actually.
Sorry, I apologise.
Just false modesty there.
But communications-wise,
yes.
So both of you have talked quite a bit in your submissions about communication, consultation, the faults of it, and otherwise, and what remedies might well exist. What are your thoughts on what Mr. Robertshaw has said, and what are your own thoughts on consultation and how it's achieved on the Isle of Man, how it's achieved by the Isle of Man government?
I think in terms of the single legal entity, because that's ultimately what we're talking about.
Yes.
I think that makes sense if you're looking at streamlining government and cutting down the scope for kind of territorial behaviour, but by organisations. But it's difficult to achieve because obviously it treads on an awful lot of toes politically and officer-wise. That you are breaking down those territorial walls, really. In terms of communication, I think the consultation, at least, I'm not sure about referenda as a regular tool. I need to think a bit more about that, but I think the role of consultation, I think that's kind of lost its way. We've seen some very skewed consultations in the last few years. For example, the health levy. Not do you agree with the health levy, but how do you think we should implement the health levy was, a recent example. I think at the very least some very strict code on how you run consultations, maybe actually have them run independently through the Tynwald side on issues, so that you've got a genuine neutral presentation of the issues to the public, maybe one way of doing it. But also this idea that people have that consultation is a form of referendum, which is quite misleading. People think, we had 200 responses in favour and 195 against. That it's not. That's not what it's about. It's about gathering views and evidence that you might otherwise have missed. So I think there is a lot of scope for developing consultation, at least, if not referenda.
And can you think of ways in which you might improve it?
Consultation, well, as I say, some fairly strict rules about how you run them.
A guide.
I mean, they do have a code of conduct on consultation, but I think something a bit stricter, and I think something that's presented through an independent third party. These are the issues, these are the questions.
So not produced by the Cabinet Office, something.
Yeah, I mean that's a fairly radical idea, I guess, but
not that radical.
No, it just so that people would trust it a bit more, and it would actually be presented as a more objective and neutral presentation of. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when government did produce stuff like that, issues and options, and it was done very neutrally by senior neutral civil servants who were respected and allowed to do this. It wasn't just a kind of one side of the argument. It did actually try and present a range of options around issues.
I think the distortion of the way consultations have moved towards the idea that they're over-influenced by the will and wish of the particular department, and Alistair just talked about the health levy issue, which sort of crashed and burned, didn't it? I think that this sort of move towards consultations that have an inbuilt bias in them are linked to the fact that they go through the departments, and the departments themselves progressively over time have gained more and more confidence that if they, the department, decide they want to get something through the Parliament, their chances of doing so are significantly better than they used to be. And it's that process that distorts and weakens the parliamentary process. Because, as I say, let's supposing the CEO of a department, and there is, I think you've changed the name to COO, they're not, they're still CEOs. The CEO takes his or her advice from a particular set of sources that CEO is comfortable with. That ultimately translates into a consultation and then the delivery of a proposal through the Council of Ministers. That's, with respect, that's putting far too much power into the hands of a CEO, taking it away from the Parliament, and it's also having something else, another effect, and that is, I'm going to use sort of fairly strong language, so forgive me, but it's creating a form of CEO arrogance, which is further removing it from the belief that they, the CEO, have to really listen to the public, because I can get this through anyway, and they do. And so I don't share Alistair's reserve about the single legal entity, and I think Laurie's probably got some reservations as well, but I think we need to face up to the fact that that's what we need to do. If you look at the last, I think it's the last paragraph of Sir John Elvidge's 2014 report, I think his final or almost final paragraph says, look, if you want to improve strategic thinking, you really need to go to a unified government or a single legal entity.
Do you think that there will likely be hurdles, though, with single legal entity that need to be overcome from going from a system like the one that we've got at the moment to a system like that?
I think they're overstated. I think people think it's going to be a big bang and chaos. It doesn't have to be that at all. I mean, you could go to bed on a Tuesday night following Tynwald's decision with a system of so many ministers and so many departments, and you wake up the following morning with exactly the same. But what you've got then is the opportunity for the political body to start adjusting and amending things in a way similar to what I've just mentioned before, which start to work better, give the opportunity for greater productivity and efficiency, better focus and better analysis. So I don't see it as a big bang at all. I see it as a refinement of a system which continues to, in broad terms, enjoys my support, but which has not been refined since it came in, and it's time it did. Jersey and Guernsey have sort of struggled with their changes and their recognition of the issues which I think we're talking about today, and perhaps have maybe rushed their fences, I don't know. I wouldn't want to see anything remotely like a big bang, because every move that the Parliament, that the executive make has to be well thought out.
In both of your submissions, in your written submissions and also in this 3 pillars document, you talk an awful lot about public accountability, public engagement. What is the importance of public engagement, and how would you further encourage the relationship, aside from referenda and the code that you suggest? Is there anything further that you'd like to add?
I think this comes to the fundamental flaw in the system as it's developed to this point. And going back to the beginning of the ministerial system, my submission is that the creation of that system was an important step in the evolution of democracy in the Isle of Man, And it created for the first time an identifiable government, but what it didn't do was put in place the things that should go around a government. For example, a mandate, an opposition, and collective accountability at the end of their term of office. And the relationship between the public and the national government is, at the moment, between the electorate and the government that emerges after a general election, is a blind date relationship. You don't know who's going to turn up. And that, to me, is, and to a number of people, is a fairly fundamental issue. And you've got that disengagement. People are kind of baffled by what goes on in Tynwald and the House of Keys, because it's like, well, I didn't vote for that. We didn't talk about that at the last election. And I think, I don't pretend to have the solutions. I think there's a number of potential solutions. But I do think it's important to recognise that deficiency, because in future I think you're going to get increasing disengagement. You've got our style of politics, which is based on local personalities. You have new residents who didn't go to school with old Johnny Quaggan or whatever. I know that's kind of simplifying it, but you know, if you've just arrived on the island and you look at the candidates in our general elections, you can't tell the difference between them because you don't know them personally, or you haven't heard stories about them.
Thank you.
Yeah. You've asked me to answer the question, or both of us the question, without reference to referendum, and I find it difficult to do that.
No, go ahead. If you wish to speak about referenda, go for it.
Okay. I think I liked Alistair's phrase, but I think we're living a bit of a lie, really, with our general election, because all we're doing, and I'm sort of falling into the lap of Laurie's views here just a little bit, but we're voting for individuals thinking that by doing so we're giving a mandate to whatever. When the new members particularly arrive, they realise, you know, what's the point? For the reasons that we've discussed before.
Yeah.
And the concept of, incidentally, future Isle of Man is neither for or against party politics. I think party politics has a role. But there's a complication as well now that the world is moving on at an ever faster rate. We're heading into a much more turbulent situation. And it's going to be more and more important that the government takes people with them, and there are going to be things arriving on the front door of Tynwald and the executive in years to come that weren't even thought of at the time of the election, and yet the elected members have got to come to conclusions and make decisions about these things. And if you're not careful, the separation, and I think we've actually seen it this time, haven't we? The separation between the electorate and the delivery gets further and further apart till the next election, and everybody says, oh, well, the next election will sort it. No, it'll keep, that process will keep repeating. I think there's some advantage in political parties defining a policy package. These proposals are not about policy packages. That's a matter for people standing, not for the likes of me. But what the referendum concept does, it keeps the system attuned to the public concerns, and has the public concern recognise that the system continues to listen. And we're in the middle of 2 or 3 things right now where a specific department has failed to listen to the sectors they're responsible for, which is just extraordinary. That shows the degree of disconnect between, if you like, the bureaucracy, which is now overpowerful, and the people, with the members sort of trying to float in between and make sense of it all. I think elected members are now at a very distinct disadvantage.
You say that like you think that it's not the politicians that have the ultimate say-so, and that's a theme that's come across quite strongly from both your submissions, actually, is this idea that actually things can get to the floor of Tynwald that haven't been signed off by a minister. And ultimately, that's not the way our system works. Everything that comes through, whether it starts its journey as a department or in a private member's mind or wherever it starts, ultimately, to get on the floor of Tynwald, you have to have a minister stand up and defend and argue for that position. So irrespective of the views of the civil service, the bureaucracy, if you can't find a minister willing to put that forward, it ain't going to happen.
I think it's a very fair point, Laurie, but yes, you're right, you're absolutely right, but that minister, I would argue, can get that opinion through even though it isn't the view of the House per se. And that's very, very dangerous. And that can, if you're a really strong minister and you're switched on to issues, that's great. But look at the turbulence that we have with our ministerial system, you know, at the moment. Ministers are sort of coming and going, and where, therefore, does the authority lie? And it lies with the CEO. And this is, so what Laurie's just said in a way is, as long as the CEO is of a view that something should happen and they are able to influence their minister sufficiently, they've got a damn good chance of getting it through. That's not good.
And I suppose the natural follow-on from that line of thought, though, is that what you're essentially saying is a minister goes to Tynwald and he'll easily convince, you know, it is only 1 or 2 members, that's all you really need. You know, you've got 9 ministers and a bunch of department members, you've almost got a majority in the keys before you opened your mouth. So actually you just need to convince 1 or 2 members of the keys. You don't need to convince a majority necessarily because you have that block. But one of your suggestions is actually to put more control in terms of decision making in the hands of Tynwald, so to have those conversations around policy on the floor rather than having them come to Tynwald as a package of measures, for example, from a department or from a government. Do you not think that runs the risk of every single decision being made by committee almost, so you end up with a bunch of camels coming out and actually nothing is quite right? It's all a little bit wrong, and actually you get members debating things they don't really have a grasp over, they don't have a deep understanding of, but they're voting the way that they've been told to vote, or they're voting the way they feel they should vote without really understanding what it is they're voting for. Because the level of support and information provided to members, as you well know, we get support from the government, from departments, but actually accessing independent advice and independent support is practically impossible for a backbench member of Tynwald.
I'm sort of in agreement with that concern, but I would say to you that that's addressed by the concept of how Tynwald and the executive decide, should you go down a route like this, how to formulate high quality, high level strategic thinking. It would no longer be defined by, identified and promulgated by a CEO in one department. And therefore all the information you guys get comes from that source, because where else is that you can go for it? Whereas if you devised a way of formulating high-level strategic thinking that was advisory, not statutory, that would then be considered by the Council of Ministers, but that advice and guidance would also be available to all the members of Tynwald when it came to a vote. And therefore I would argue that as long as you ran the strategic advisory system well, that the level, quality and amount of information available at the fingertips of a member would be of a much higher quality than exists at the moment. If I can just sort of...
And Chris, do you think that level of information will be sufficient to outweigh what we tend to see on the island, which is a kind of default position of populism, which is, I don't really care what the information is showing me, this isn't very popular, I'm not going to support it. That seems to be the direction that Tynwald has gone in recent years, where actually we are seeing quite regularly, more populist positions being taken, the government U-turning on things that turn out not to be popular, even things they've decided are fundamentally important, in some cases even things Tynwald has decided this is the right way to go. You have then seen big shifts in policy positions and big changes and things, because it turns out that the social media crowd are very unhappy with this, so we have to change positions. So do you think providing members with more information, more of that strategic thinking, actually would be enough to overcome that kind of natural defensiveness and that natural sense towards, I have to do what's popular?
I think it would significantly improve debate in Tynwald. I think it's sort of, if I may say this, I think it's deteriorated somewhat. To go back to an earlier comment, I think those who are uncomfortable about a direction. They haven't got the resource that they need to really challenge it, and they also know they haven't got the votes either. So if you provided each individual member with a higher, two things, higher quality, better presented, neutral information sitting ahead and above a departmental decision on a given matter, on the one hand, and on the other hand, you also created an opportunity for that member to be able to keep the finger on the pulse of where the electorate were going, would significantly improve debate and allow members much greater sense of confidence when they stood up to speak for or against a subject, or even just simply observe on it. And also, by dropping down to a minister and one, you're also limiting the ability of the lazy ability, if you like, of the Council of Ministers to push stuff through because they can. And I think one of the fascinating situations that might well arise is where Tynwald ended up being at odds with advice received, or you'd really see some excellent debates then, and I thought a thoughtful process that would just be fascinating, whether it was disagreeing with the electorate through the referendum or disagreeing with the high quality thinking. I think that would all deliver a healthier environment in Tynwald. Does that answer your question?
To an
Not
extent.
really.
I mean, I suppose where I'm going with this is I don't see any instance where Tynwald would go against the will of, say you've got a referendum with decent turnout. I can't picture Tynwald deciding to go against that view, even if it's only an advisory referendum, even if it is, everyone knows it's the right thing to do. Actually, if a referendum comes back and says we don't like it, I cannot see Tynwald having the strength of character to do it in the face of that level of opposition. And I suppose the question I'd ask both of you, because you've both been around government for a long time or been watching government for a long time, can you think of an instance where Tynwald has voted to reduce service provision or cut budgets or stop doing something at any point in the time you've been watching government? So you're advocating we should put more of this ability to make the decision, not just to actually be the people that make the final decision, but to inform and start that process and be more involved in that process. But ultimately, if you're suggesting a weakening of the executive, saying actually Comyn shouldn't be able to make decisions and push things through, and I don't necessarily disagree with you on that, but if you're saying you're doing that, then the counterbalance is, well, you're putting more of that control in the hands of Tynwald. Can you think of some examples where Tynwald has voted to cut services or reduce budgets?
I think one has to be very careful about this whole concept of budgets, though, Laurie. I don't see matters related specifically to a budget going up or down being a matter that you would ask the electorate to consider, because we're a democracy, and the whole nature of a democracy is that people want more for less. That would be dangerous. I think you would. I should have put it in here. Really, you have to be very, very careful about retaining the absolute authority for budgets to lie within Tynwald. I mean, you couldn't go any other way than to retain that absolute control in Tynwald.
Sorry, but what I'm getting at is, say, for example, you get a proposal from the government that says, actually, we're spending too much money on X, we're woefully inefficient, and we need to spend less money on, I don't know, pensions or whatever it may be.
That's a budgetary matter that wouldn't go to a referendum.
Right, so you don't think matters of efficiency would go out then to the public for that discussion? So who gets to decide then what matters go to the public and which don't?
I think matters of internal governmental efficiency are a matter between the parliamentary process, the executive and the operating departments, because the electorate are not really in a position to see the internal functioning and operation of government. The referenda issue relates to big ticket matters, and I don't think, incidentally, that the referendum concept should be applied until Tynwald has exercised itself pretty thoroughly examining a matter before it decides, actually, we need to go to a referendum. Because the way a referendum should work is that it should be a referendum item. And here we're looking at the Swiss system. The Swiss system is much more complicated than I imagine here. are much more sophisticated. Remember, they had to make democracy work for 4 cantons that even could talk different languages and hardly ever see each other. You know, they had a real problem, but it works. And when it's decided that a matter goes to a referendum, then the body that assembles the referendum, I would think it might even be led by a Deemster or somebody of significant legal competence, who would make sure that the presentation that was before the public was balanced, even, and provided both the for and the against, so that you were doing your absolute damnedest to avoid bias. And if you look at the way the Swiss system works, it's pretty well. It says on the front page, it has been deemed that this matter be placed before you. Page 1 is, these are all the reasons why it should happen. Page 2, as it were, next page is, these are all the reasons why it shouldn't happen. And on the back, there's the opportunity to vote. But you'd steer clear from internal efficiencies and budgetary matters.
But you would imagine they would be therefore like really sort of high-level questions then that would be asked to the electorate. So, for example, like Scotland devolution, asking, should there be a Scottish Parliament? Should there not be a Scottish Parliament? Those types of high-level questions.
No, I'd go further. I'd go further than that. I mean, for example, I would go down. I mean, look at something as simple as 20 mile an hour. That became such a contentious thing. It might be that, regardless of what individual members thought or a department thought, it might be deemed that that goes to a referendum. Now, you might say, well, that's a small issue, but look, we've lost the engagement. Alice has talked about this feeling of dissatisfaction that the electorate is saying, well, they're just not listening to us. Why should I bother to vote for an individual?
So that's actually a really good example of the system we have at the moment, because that 20 mile an hour idea didn't come from a department. So you've articulated already that all these ideas come through the departments, from a CEO out to Tim. Well, that's not the case here. So that 20 mile an hour issue actually came from backbench members of Tynwald. That's where it originated.
Yeah.
And it went through Tynwald because that's what they'd promised their constituents they would do. But actually, if you're trying to say no, members shouldn't be able to do that, there should be additional layers above that. Aren't you actually breaking that democratic connection between the public and their elected politician, who actually said in their manifesto, I'm going to go do a thing and let me go do it, I will fight for this, and got elected on that basis?
Fascinating. Thank you for coming back to me on that one. I think you rightly open up a discussion about private members' bills and individual issues. I think we're over-cautious about making absolutely sure an individual member brings something forward and then everybody steps back, because what's happening is more and more highly important issues are coming in through private members' bills, and the one that frightens me to death is the safe spaces. I mean, that's come in as a private members' bill. You look at the detail of that, it's catastrophically awful. But it's a private members' bill, so they've got the right to do it. If the public understood something like the private members' bill, and we could go back to issues like the issue of assisted dying, for example. Was that a private members' bill? I can't. Yeah, yes. That was a private members' bill. You've got to be careful to balance the issue of how much do we protect the right of an individual member to how does Tynwald and how do the public respond to it. And what we're doing is, it might very well be the case that that particular member got elected on the back of a particular issue which they then brought forward, but that doesn't make it a national issue. It makes it an individual member's issue, and I think you need the opportunity in those circumstances. I mean, I would certainly put the Safe Spaces Bill in front of a referendum, because that's absolutely awful, and it's giving all sorts of powers which are way beyond that, which are necessary. I don't even, with the greatest of respect, well, no, not greatest of respect, I don't even think that the member concerned has even considered the implications of that bill properly. It's awful.
So both of you as well have talked a bit about this idea of bias in the engagement, so that government put out consultations that are quite heavily biased one way or the other. And I think you're right. There is definitely an evidence of bias in the consultations that go out, and you both of you have suggested that consultations or referendum or whatever process you use has to be a bit more neutral when presenting things to the public. But do you not think that in a political environment there's always going to be bias? So one of the things, Alistair, I think you said was when you go out with a consultation, you should present options to the public, various options. But take me, for example, I'm a politician with particularly strong views on a variety of matters. Why would I go out and ask the public a question that I didn't believe in? So why would I say, actually, I'm going to go out and consult with you on some options, but one of those options I fundamentally don't believe in and would never implement if it was up to me? Why would I go out and ask you those questions if it's something that I would never do?
I think you would do that. I think you would present the options to show you're working out. You start with the issues, the problems and the challenges. You then look at a range of potential solutions, and you then arrive at your preferred solution and explain why that you think that's the way forward. But you show that you have considered all the options. That doesn't seem to happen very often.
But what I'm getting at is there are some options that I wouldn't consider. You know, there are some things which you just go, that's not even on the table. I don't care.
You're aware of it.
Oh yeah, you'd be aware of them, but why would I spend...
Explain why it's not on the table.
But why would I want to spend time, energy and resources in postulating an idea that actually isn't on the table, and then giving people the ability to say, actually, no, I do like that's what I want to do? Because in those circumstances, you could end up with a massive waste of time and energy if what you get back from that consultative process is you should go do the thing which you've got no intention of doing. Oh.
I think in the interests of open and candid engagement with the public, that you would say, you know, this is the range of options, and people are not stupid. They would be aware of the unacceptable options as well, but to show that you've considered it. And I think there has been an increasing narrowing of kind of focus in recent years, that, you know, there's no evidence that departments have looked at different options. And it'd be reassuring to know that they had.
Given the voter apathy that we're all aware of, do you think that the referenda would draw the right number of people after the initial furore of the fact that, oh look, we're being asked what we think about this? Do you think that would maintain, or do you think it would end up where referenda were actually very poorly supported?
Can I answer that one?
Yeah, well, you're the referee.
Can I just come back to Laurie's point first and come to you, Stu, afterwards, if I may? I'm actually with Laurie here, and at last we found a difference of opinion, which is just great. And that is, it's not, having got voted in as a member of Keys, it's not for you then to step back and say, that's too hard, here's your options, you decide. That's too complicated. And also, if you think about it, and Alistair, I'm sure on reflection might agree with me in the sense that it'll be hard enough anyway to get into a public mind, here's an issue we're asking you to give advice on or a view on, yes or no, because in the end that's all you guys have got, it's yes or no. And therefore the concept of a referenda is not about abrogating responsibility to the electorate to decide on something. It's that you have considered something in very considerable detail, you've agonised over it, you've applied a lot of energy to it, you may be arriving at a position on something, but you actually think, yep, this is something that we want to seek a yes or no on from the public. So I don't think offering different options other than yes, no would work any more than it works for you guys. As far as would there be referendum fatigue, yes, if you misuse it. I think if you use it too often, it would fall down and people would say, for goodness sake, just get on with your job, do it, that's what you're elected for. Too little and we'd end up where we are now, where we're not consulting. So that's why in the proposals I think that it's something specifically lies with the Chief Minister here, because I'm of the view that the Chief Minister's role is too weak, and I think that the Chief Minister should be able to intervene once something's really developed within Tynwald, to say that that particular matter should go. It includes private members' bills. It could be a motion in Tynwald of significance. It could be more difficult. It could be a bill. I mean, I'm thinking now of the safe spaces issue, because all you would ask the public is, here's the reasons why you should do it, here's the reasons why you shouldn't. What do you think? Yes or no? So you have to keep it simple. You have to not overuse it or not underuse it, and that's a judgment call.
What would be this sweet spot? Would it be, say, 4 a year or something like that, 2 a year?
I would no more than 4, because you get fatigue, referendum fatigue there. Sometimes, some years you might actually not have any at all. But this extra role of the Chief Minister, apart from being the chairman, hiring and firing and all this sort of thing, and trying to hold a line, a sort of, collection of people with a myriad of views, it would be that person would also have to have know that beyond being the chairman of Council of Ministers and beyond being a constituency MHK, they have this particular authority and role to keep their finger on the pulse of public opinion and have to decide whether or not something should go for a referendum. And the people will judge that person as to whether they over or underuse that facility. And the members in Tynwald will be very quick to say, Chief Minister, nah, you're pushing this,
Question for Alistair, if I may. Consultations, a cynic would say that consultations are just a window dressing to democracy. Do you think that there need to be more laws about, more legislation about the way that consultations are held, so that it isn't a case of getting the answer that you want?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about whether it's a matter for legislation or not, but clear rules about how they're conducted and how they're presented. And as I said, if you actually had them handled by a neutral third party, it might engender a bit more public trust. And consultations are important in the context of the Isle of Man, particularly because the government has no policy mandate. So each issue they're addressing, they're addressing it kind of with no existing weight of public opinion behind it. So they need to go out to the public and do that carefully, I think.
Can I come in on that one? I think Alistair's absolutely right, but once you say that, it opens a load of questions. So it's right to do so, it's right to make it independent of departments, but once you do that, you're talking about the generality of government, and then where does that small team that has to assemble a neutral submission on a concept, where do they get the information from? As it stands at the moment, the only interested party up to that point is going to have been the department emanating the interest. And what I'm saying here is that you limit down the role and function of the departments into the operation and delivery, and you have this higher level strategic capacity. And if you were going to a consultation or a referendum, that's where this broader based information would come from rather than the department, because if you're not careful, all that would happen would this so-called non-biased or independent body would only have one resource, and they can't afford to go off themselves in all sorts of directions to find alternative information, alternative views. And as far as the strategic concept is concerned, you'd have to be very, very careful about making damn sure that you didn't give too much power to the strategic thinking. The authority lies in Tynwald, and it must stay there. There would be a secretariat concept which would assemble, there's a lot of good people out there locally. There's people all over the world we can draw in to help us develop really high quality policy. But once that team has provided its proposals to the Council of Ministers and the Council of Ministers have checked it, have they checked with all the departments to make sure it works? What do we think about it? Once they become Council of Ministers as a whole becomes comfortable about it and decide that they want to take it further, then that information then becomes available to all the members. And if it goes to a referendum, then again the team have got access to non-biased departmental information. So the various components, they all fit together, Stu, I think.
With the legislation that's currently in place, obviously it is considered by some, including one private member in the House of Keys who's put forward a leave to introduce regarding the Referendum Act 1979. Do you think it's sufficient in its current state? And if so, why? And if not, how can it be improved?
I think it would have to be examined under the within the concept of the proposal about, in my humble opinion, to moving to a unified government, and it would therefore need amendment and refinement. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask, do you not think that the system that both of you are proposing in different ways, but essentially the same thing, which is more public involvement, more public say, I suppose, on the decisions that are made, especially when some of these decisions are quite technical in nature, do you not think the government runs the risk of falling into a form of paralysis where it feels unable to act because either it hasn't yet gone out to consult or to a referendum, or it has done so where the answers they got back weren't what they were expecting? Do you not run the risk there that actually, far from being a nimble jurisdiction that's capable of moving quite quickly, you're actually going to slow down our ability to do anything? Because ultimately, once you have established that process whereby it is expected that government consult, or it's expected government hold referenda, then the decision not to do that on a particular issue would be taken as being out of the ordinary, would be subject to quite a lot of political pressure. And so actually you could end up in a situation where government feels it just can't act and therefore can't function simply because it's built this weight of expectation on itself.
I think... Oh, sorry, Chris. I'd just like to say, I mean, you know, consultation is not my big thing. I just think they could do it better and more consistently. I think you'd have clear criteria about what you're supposed to be consulting on. So you're not consulting on every little thing that might be unpopular. And you also make it clear that, you know, the consultation results are not binding. It's an evidence gathering exercise. It is not a little mini referendum in which, you know, just a couple of hundred people take part, and that then steers the whole direction of policy.
I think we're perhaps in danger of not necessarily confusing, but conflating two different issues. I think a concept of a consultation at an operational level is a completely different thing to the occasional referendum that might apply to a high-level issue of import. You know, like Safe Spaces Bill is, if you read the bill in detail, you'll soon realise, wow, this is really important. This is quite profound. That's very different to an operational issue. Operational consultations related to operational issues should stay with the departments, because I've no desire to see departments lose influence or control on operational matters. The minister's still accountable for operational delivery, as is the should be COO, and they should be responsible for their own consultations. But because the deck's been cleared, this business about CEOs being these grandiose generalists overall, but not specifically good at anything, or that's the wrong word, isn't it? Expert in a particular area. In my world, if you like, the CEO is very much a specialist in the area, and that COO and that minister is very accountable to the public for that operational delivery, and that's where it stays. And you don't go to referendum on things like that.
Do you think that there's sometimes a conflation in your experience between, because I know that you've talked a lot about sort of strategic and then operational delivery separately. When you were a member of Tynwald Court, I remember a lot of those conversations or debate.
Thank you for listening.
But do you think that there's sometimes a conflation between those two things in departments at varying levels, or is that something that is quite distinct and separate in every department in the mind of every politician?
I'm not quite sure I've understood the question, but operational stuff stays with the departments, operational delivery. The stuff that impacts on a day-to-day, month-to-month, year-to-year basis with the electorate in terms of their responsibilities. How can I give you an example? An adjustment to... let's go back to education. An adjustment to a policy within the schools. I'd be very reticent to see that sort of, for example, go to referendum. Whereas higher level issues, here's the way I would define it. If the responsibility lies within the department, the operating department, then it shouldn't really go to a referendum. I suppose I'm sort of confusing myself in terms of 20 mile an hour on there, but I wouldn't want to overuse the referendum. It's the thing that people would be aware that they had on a continuing basis as the world changed around them, and that 3 years in, the world is a very different place to the one when that particular house got elected, and it's facing problems that it didn't even know, quite reasonably know, were going to hit it in the face 3 years in from the point of election.
I think I'd like to move on a little from this point and just sort of move into sort of more of a conversation about the Attorney General's chambers, if I can. So, Mr. Peters.
Yeah, in your opinions, is the current relationship between the AG and the government successful?
No, it's awful.
Because?
Well, the concept of politics and the concept of a court of law is that you present alternative views. That's how it works. And out of a conflict of opinions coming together, we try to, you try to, in Parliament, make a decision on something, and you've got opinions for and against an issue. In a court of law, you have the prosecutor and the defence. You hear both. You also should have a variety of different opinions coming into that process. The horror of our, and I really mean that, the horror of our current system related to the AGs is just awful. The AG advises the governor, the chief minister, the council of ministers, LegCo. It indirectly, sort of through Tynwald, advises MHKs. It advises all the departments. It has responsibility for prosecutions. It oversees issues related to major contracts, etc. And it is a singularity. And that power is now being misused. For example, look at the mess they got in over the Rosalind Ranson affair, which cost millions. The point is, the AG, and I'll use this as an example, the AG was advising a CEO of a department about a particular issue and was obliged to give advice at that level that benefited the department. That was their job. That then conflicted with a higher level issue of, hang on, there's a reputational problem here. If this goes to the employment tribunal, then and it goes against the government, then it's a reputational, high level reputational damage to the Isle of Man. The AG should have been able to advise at a higher level exactly that, which should have stopped the process ever going that far. But it didn't stop. The AG continued with this disformed sort of advice that went to the department right the way through. I am really, really concerned in particular with the position we're arriving at between the AG's departments and the Employment and Equalities Tribunal. It really deeply worries me. When Richard Wright reviewed the Rosalind Ranson affair, and you've got that in front of you now, somewhere, I think it's coming back at some stage. It appears very strongly to me that what happened was, this has happened, how do we fix the Employment and Equality Tribunal? The issue really is, no, how do we fix the AG's department? Because that's where the source of the problem, as it were, came from. I tried to resolve this a number of years ago because I was very worried on the part of elected members that they were having this singularity of opinion. So when the AG is asked by any of you, learned attorney, what do you think about so-and-so? He's already given advice to the department on a subject. He's not going to give you a contrary advice, nor is he going to give you an alternative. it's back to this issue that you haven't got the opportunity to engage. So what, with a variety of views, and so I tried with one or two other members to create a sense of tension, because for as many lawyers as there are different opinions, and I tried to get the Solicitor General introduced as completely separate from the AG's department, and a resource for members to say, okay, that's what we're hearing, but what do you think? And the alternative opinion would come in. And everybody nodded sagely and said, this is a very good idea. And what we got was a Deputy Attorney General, part of the system. Why was that done there? Oh, that was done because the AG's got this massive range of responsibilities and duties. They are becoming a dangerous controlling body because they are difficult to contradict. What the AG's department is doing at the moment in relation to the Employment and Equality Tribunal is frightening. If you look at the difference between the way the Employment and Equality Tribunal was set up on the Isle of Man compared to the UK, it was intentionally set up as a more simple process that, if you like, people had their day in court where they could put their argument forward and it would be considered. There is a determination on the part of the AG's department right now to undermine that by making it as complicated as possible. So what they're trying to do, they're trying to make each case extended as far as possible, as expensive as far as possible, as detailed as far as possible, and the result of that is it puts people off. In other words, particularly somebody who hasn't got the resource to employ a highly experienced barrister or whatever. But what they're against on the AG side is barristers, endless funds, and it's doing something else very dangerous. And it's making CEOs of departments lazy, because they know that if they have an issue that is, shall we say, possibly contentious, the CEO will know automatically that all they have to do is transfer it to the AG's department. No cost to the department at all. The AG's department has got massive resource of taxpayers' funds, and it doesn't come back on the CEO. You link that with the fact that the Appointments Commission has now started to allocate roles for the AG's department inside the Employment Tribunal, and you start to see this determination, and you follow current cases, for example, now you read up on them and you'll see that the determination on the part of the AG's department is to complicate matters as much as possible, to frighten the whistleblower or the complainant off because it's too long, too expensive, too complex, etc.
Can I just say, Chris, it is quite a large chambers. So do you think that everybody that is in the Attorney General's chambers is of the similar or same mind? Because when we talk about the AGC, we're talking about a lot of people in a lot of different areas within the AGC. Do you think that everybody, is a culture of that, is there?
Well, I hope not, Chair, but I mean, the influence of control, what's that phrase? Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The power of the AG's department is just enormous, and it is the culture, if not the individual opinions of individual members. The culture is going to be significantly influenced by the will and determination of the AG. And when you're in control and you have, the resources and the money, and as it were, a determination to crush opposition. Sorry to use those strong words. Then that's what will happen. And if you have an alternative view, you might very well leave the Attorney General's office. I mean, when the ministerial system started, 8 to 12 members. It's now got 75. It's got its fingers everywhere. Years ago, we said, for goodness sake, let's get the prosecution service out from underneath the AGs. It's still there. It's not funny. It's really not funny, and I believe it's damaging morale inside the government service. And I mean, I haven't included the AG's issue here in this this submission because it's a big issue all on its own. You know, it really is.
How do you think the relationship between the AG and the government's changed since your time in office?
I think it's been very, very slow and very slow, but determinedly from what it was. You know, how I used to observe it as a younger man in the 80s, a smaller team, well respected, into this machine that's driving and controlling in the way it behaves. It frightens me, it really does.
Alistair, do you have a different opinion? Or
No, I haven't really studied this in any depth at all, so I haven't really anything to add on that.
Thank you.
I say that because I've been, you know, close to it on a number of issues, but I learned a huge amount once I got involved with the Rosalind Ranson affair. It shocked me, actually.
Stu?
You wrote about revising the AG's department in line with amendments to the ministerial form of government. Would you care to elaborate on that?
In this paper here,
No, that was in the written submission.
this one,
Yeah, no, not this one, no.
Not
The previous
today,
one.
no.
There was
There was a
what
Yeah.
was this then?
you sent a submission
public consultation response.
a little while ago, 3rd of December 2024.
Oh yeah. So what do you want me to say about that? Sorry.
So
About revising the AG's department in line with amendments to the ministerial form of government. How would you revise it?
Well, right. The first thing I would do is move the prosecution service out of the way. The second thing I would do would revise the role of the Solicitor General so that was a totally independent advice service to you members, so that you had more than one opinion. I mean, it's just awful that you've only got this one singularity of legal opinion. It's wrong. I would make the cost of going to litigation through the employment tribunal or whatever, I would make it a cost to a department, an operational department, so that when they decided not to try and deal with it themselves and, you know, sort it out themselves, that if they lost the ability at no cost to pass it on to the AG's department, I think that would have them second guessing a lot of their decisions, thinking, hang on a second, this could be very, very expensive to my department. Do I want to go ahead with this in this particular way, or can I resolve it? It's too easy just to chuck it at the AGs. Those are three things. I'm sure I hadn't sort of prepared myself to answer those questions, but that certainly would be a starting point.
Can I ask, do you think if you had two, like you say, you've got two different lawyers providing advice to members or to government separately, do you not run the risk there that Tynwald Court becomes, well, my lawyer says this and your lawyer says that, and then you're asking elected members of the House of Keys who are not lawyers to try and make legal judgments based on a legal argument, which isn't necessarily going to be the strength of the House of Keys?
I think, no, I don't, Laurie, because I think the concept of politics works better if there are conflict in opinions. The court of law, people's lives, whole lives, hang on the representation of two different views. I think it's only right and proper that members have access to a resource which gives them, it may be on occasion exactly the same opinion as the AG gives, but it may be different, and a member may very well ask the Solicitor General if that person was, as it were, independent and had to be responsive to them. That person might from time to time say, yes, but what will you please investigate on a legal sense this or that point, and give us advice. A member would have to conduct themselves responsibly. You have to conduct yourself responsibly every time you press the green or the red button. You need that resource.
I hate to be the one saying this, but it feels like from a lot of the evidence you're giving today, you're living in a very idealised world of Manx politics, I think. Whereas actually on the ground, I'm not quite sure everyone operates in the way that you would ideally like them to operate, taking in all the information and making a reasoned, well-argued decision based on everything they've heard. Actually, there are a lot of other factors that I think come into play when members are making decisions. And I just want to caution a little bit. It feels like you are trying to sell us the idealised version of the
I hope so. I hope I am, because you may not necessarily climb to the top of the mountain, but we certainly need to move up from where we are now, because it's not a very good place.
Okay.
So we're just sort of moving on a little bit from that. Your experience in seeking change, Mr. Hooper will lead on those questions.
Yeah, I think both of you have stated in various ways that you think, broadly speaking, the ministerial government has worked. It's it's been successful, but also it needs to continue to evolve in order to keep that up. I think that's a fair representation of what you've said. But I think you've also both said that Tynwald, and Mr. Ramsay, you wrote this in your submission, Tynwald has often failed to properly challenge and test government policy proposals. So, ministerial system sort of works, but the weakness, as far as you're concerned, is a lack of proper parliamentary oversight and accountability. How would you see that changing? Like, what is it about the parliamentary process that is preventing Tynwald from having that? Aside from the lack of independent advice, we've heard quite a bit about that. What is it that's stopping Tynwald from actually being able to effectively challenge government policy?
I think one of the issues is that the blurring of the lines, so that a large number of parliamentarians are also involved in some way or other with the executive. And it just, because I guess it's an understandable desire to kind of involve everyone, so you end up with this kind of team Tynwald thing where it's very easy to suffer from groupthink, and again this sort of single source of information problem, which applies, I think, to policy as well. So I think you need a clearer demarcation and a recognition that the scrutiny roles are equally as valuable as the kind of getting a hands-on operational stuff. And I personally think that Legislative Council could be the detached body that doesn't kind of disagree politically, but just tests the business cases, the evidence. When government presents something that's a bit half-baked, they say, actually, there's lots of stuff missing here, rather than we've all had a briefing, so we're all on board kind of mentality.
Can I push back a little on that as a member of Legislative Council myself and suggest that maybe some of that work does take place, it's just not necessarily always in the public view?
No, except that. I think, and I recognise that obviously there's a lot of work goes on in relation to legislation and so on, but when you actually see the debates on big issues, there isn't much debate. Now, I don't know if there's a debate somewhere else. There's a little bit of emperor's clothes sometimes, and I think part of the problem is in recent years, the Legislative Council has been a bit kind of downgraded. That the perception, that you're not entitled to have a view, you're not entitled to challenge. You're there to look at the detail, but you're not there to challenge on presentation of policy.
I don't think that anybody on Legislative Council feels that way at all. I think that we challenge in departments, we challenge one-to-one, and we challenge in relation to legislation, certainly in here, and have changed our processes over the course of the last 5 years to reflect that, and be that in the chamber itself through our stage process, ensuring that we don't have any rubber stamping at all, and also in private as well, with business and functioning of Legislative Council and the way that we decide how we're going to conduct our business, not what business we conduct, but how we decide to take bills through Legislative Council. There are a lot of conversations that do happen behind the scenes.
You don't hear them at the big...
Not always, no. Yeah, not always, no, you're right.
There's something in politics called the law of triviality, which is essentially bike shed politics. We talk about what we understand. We understand how to do these little things, so that's why we spend hours debating the little things and actually not so long debating the big stuff, because it's harder to wrap your head around. Do you think that is... I mean, that seems to be relatively common in democracies across the place. I don't think it's unique to the Isle of Man. But do you think that the reason it feels so pronounced here is a fault of the ministerial system, that kind of, because people are all involved in government, they don't feel able to challenge, or is it more a problem with the way we elect our MHKs in the first place?
A bit of both, I think. I think the political culture around elections is very localised, and it's very much about what you can see. There's no tradition of talking about big policy issues. and also the minister, because so many people are involved in government, I think it's nobody's job really to stand back and have a different perspective. And it isn't a question of people being right or wrong, it's just having different perspectives on things.
I've spent, so from a legislative council perspective, since I was elected back in 2018, I've spent a lot of time being responsible for legislation in departments, so working on pre-legislative scrutiny, bringing policy principles before ministers like the one that was Minister for DHSC at the start of this administration, and you know, sort of testing policy ideas, suggesting and sort of, you know, sort of developing thought out, but not necessarily taking those decisions, because those decisions would sit with directly elected MHKs. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the challenge isn't there, I would suggest.
Yeah, well, perhaps it'd be great if we could possibly see a bit more of that in public, you know.
So do you think that if there was more visibility of some of the challenge that goes on, that would help build confidence that the government isn't just ramrodding things through, and this idea that Tynwald members will just nod anything through if it suits them? Actually, if we could see some more of that challenge happening on the floor of Tynwald or in the public arena, that might build more confidence and more trust in the system.
I think so.
So actually, one of the weaknesses that you would articulate with the ministerial system is the fact that so much of this stuff is done off the floor, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's the kind of the real political debates and conversations are kind of submerged, I think. You know.
I think things have changed over the years. You know, I think the will of the independent member to challenge and have the confidence to do so has diminished over the years. I think there was going right back, there was a greater confidence in an independent mind. I think the way the ministerial system has evolved culturally, where people coming into politics don't come into politics with the cuts and bruises of a lifetime's experience, and have a determined confidence to say, this is what I think. What we're seeing is people coming in, younger people with real commitment, but once they get in, they haven't got the resource that they need to develop that confidence, and that's then further tarnished, if you like, by the I won't repeat it again, but all the problems emanating from disproportionate voting systems, and we need to sort of open that up. We need to give members more confidence through more information, and we need to rebalance the voting system so that there's more value in debate. I think that's been lost to some degree.
Do you think removing the collective responsibility requirement that the council ministers have would aid that? Right at the start you talked about how government policy can actually be 5 people. It's a majority of Comin, that brings them, it brings the department, everyone's kind of bound by it. Do you think getting rid of that collective responsibility or limiting it in some way actually would have the effect of opening up the debate?
Yeah, what I think is that you need to take the problem out. I wouldn't necessarily dismiss the collective responsibility thing, but I think you need to put the Council of Ministers in a position where it can more intelligently, information-wise, arrive at a collective decision. So, I mean, I sat in the Council of Ministers on a number of occasions and watched stuff pop up out of a department, you know, and you're totally focused on a whole load of things that really matter to you, and it's almost, I mean, let me exaggerate for effect here, because I am, but you do that, but remember what I'm doing here. So, and then hopefully you can get to past the 5 point, and then, okay, it's policy. That's wrong. I mean, that's because big stuff's coming up from below when it shouldn't. If you had, on the big strategic issues, you had a body to advise the Council of Ministers on a subject, thoroughly examined and presented to the Council of Ministers, it's not one particular member fighting, it's the whole of the Council of Ministers listening and examining the evidence that they've got on a big issue. They might reject it at that stage before it goes anywhere.
Is this a sort of similar concept to the sort of scientific input that we were looking for? I say we, but those in the last administration were looking for during the COVID pandemic. Is that the type of thing that you're thinking about there? But
No,
for
strategic issues can be all
strategic
sorts.
stuff.
High-level strategic stuff can be all sorts of things, but where we've gone wrong is we've got 8 legal entities, and it's got to go somewhere, as everything else has got to go somewhere, and out it pops back again. I mean, it's not fair on CEOs and individual ministers to carry that burden on their own without having an ability to get a proper consideration of a broad-based approach. So, I support collective responsibility, but well-advised and well-informed collective responsibility.
So more subject matter expertise into high-level strategic policy making.
Yeah. As long as you don't give too much power to that body, because then you take it away from Parliament, you take it away from the executive, which you can't do.
How would you ensure its impartiality, this outside authority, if you like? Because otherwise it would just, I mean, we've got various groups. We've got people like the Chamber of Commerce who advise government on how.
Well, they have a biased opinion, Stu. They have a biased particular opinion, you know.
Yeah. So how would you avoid that bias in?
The important thing would be to have a collection of advisors who enter into the process. For example, there are a lot. I mean, I actually, since I stepped out of politics, this is sad, this, isn't it? Since I've stepped out of politics but retained an interest, I've been quite shocked at the number of really smart people on the Isle of Man. I'm agog sometimes at some of the expertise that exists, but that expertise never gets the chance to talk in it hasn't got the platform to submit its opinion. The only thing it can do is go through a department, and that department may very well say, no, we're not listening to that, and it's shut out. If that expertise could inform the high-level strategic body that would not only have to think at that level, but also say, how does what information we're getting around a particular subject, how will it interact with the operational departments? And they'd have to check with all those departments and get feedback. That would be the state of balance. Ultimately, though, the Council of Ministers have to decide about the advice that they've got. And if the Council of Ministers considered that the quality, level and balance of advice that they were getting was inadequate, then they would think, no, we're going to ignore it.
Have these things not been tested before, though? Like when we had, when we're plagued by the COVID pandemic, like we had sort of certain things that were put in place that were for an abnormal situation. So the clinical advisory board, the scientific sort of group of individuals, I think it was headed up by Mr. Mercer as well politically. And both of those things then disappeared. And you had a collective responsibility that sat around the medical advisory board. I believe like some of the board members then got in touch with Timble members about their views not striking through because they had collective responsibility on things and because they couldn't speak directly to the Council of Ministers. And how would you envision something like that would have longevity if it was put in place?
Well, gosh. I'm not going to comment on what I think about what happened in COVID, other than to say that advice the Council of Ministers got was malformed, so it was a bit of a fail. And I'll leave it at that. I mean, there's a whole story around that. We don't want to visit that here, do we?
No. I'm just trying to sort of like understand what that structure might look like and how you might protect that, from itself in becoming or being given some degree of power over and above Parliament, over and above directly elected, and how would you protect it is the point, from itself and from outside influences?
Look, Tynwald is still the highest court. It makes the final decision. Council of Ministers submit stuff to the highest court in the land. It remains powerful. How it interacted and responded to the advisory service would be a matter for it. And once it established in its mind what the function, the advisory function was, the Council of Ministers as a whole would want to be sure that that advice was the best possible advice it could be. But it would be every member equally coming to that conclusion, whereas I sort of, in a very colloquial way, described how so much stuff came to the Council of Ministers popping up through a particular department where the other members had simply not got the time to examine all the things they were responsible for and to dive deeply enough into the subject in that department or that department, and therefore there's an over-reliance on the ministers' wish to bring it forward. Behind it, the CEO's wish to have it come forward, whereas a high-level strategic body advising the Council of Ministers as a whole would be bringing, encapsulated in one place, a set of advisory views about a subject, allowing Council of Ministers as a whole to consider something. It's very... We're almost upside down at the moment, the way our government works. It's the more time goes on, the more I become concerned about the power and influence of the departments, and the less influence Tynwald has got over what's actually happening.
Are some of the NED type roles that are sort of, sitting in and around government, be it on departments, offices, statutory boards, is there enough? Does that do enough to inject subject matter expertise to the level that it might need it?
I don't actually believe in NEDs. I mean, I remember I believe that the departments have got too many responsibilities in too many areas and therefore become a sort of generalists, and I'm saying no, bring it down to operational. Let the COO focus on those operational matters. Let the minister be seen in public to be responsible for those operational issues. What you're trying to do with the NEDs, this is probably a very unpopular opinion, but you're trying to reinforce a warped system, and I wouldn't do that. I would remove the NEDs.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Ramsay?
I think there's a lot of questions around that whole concept of NEDs, and I wasn't aware that it was thrashed out politically about how it would work with the established civil service. Would you reinforce what was happening, or would you create a kind of dysfunctionality? I can understand why you'd want to try and inject a bit of private sector expertise, but I don't think it's really been thrashed out properly. I don't know how it's worked in practice, to be honest with you.
And may I? Just around, because I don't think that we've quite covered it, I think that you've made reference to it, Mr. Robertshaw, around the Chief Minister and the Chief Minister's role.
Yeah.
And the strength of that role sort of sits at the moment with, first amongst equals, and then, a lot of perhaps soft power that might be injected into the situation here and there. What doesn't work about that?
What doesn't work with our system, I'm using the Chief Minister as a way, as a vehicle to respond to it, is that because the departments are overpowerful, because in the operation of our system through Tynwald has weakened Tynwald as well, and to some extent therefore the role and image of the MHK. We are now in a position where the general public are losing confidence and trust in believing that government, Tynwald, is doing the best thing, and that the public are being listened to. And the concept of giving the Chief Minister the responsibility to decide whether a matter should go to a referendum or not, is a mechanism to make sure the referendum system works. But it then identifies that the Chief Minister has a new responsibility for making a decision as to whether something goes to referenda or not, because if you said, Tynwald decides that, for example, that something goes to a referendum, the vote could go depending on which way the House thinks it should go. In other words, if, for example, it's for something, it might vote against it going to a referendum, and vice versa. Whereas the Chief Minister is sort of exposed if he fails to bring something to a referendum which the public decide, you really shouldn't have done that. He's undermined, he or she has undermined their responsibility as Chief Minister. They've lost really serious ground. If you left the responsibility for applying a referendum to Tynwald as a whole, it becomes a sort of much more general thing. Nobody's actually responsible, and the people might think, Tynwald doesn't want us to have our say. Because if the Chief Minister gets it wrong when something really important should have gone to the people, and he or she doesn't do it, and the people then use a mechanism to be devised by Tynwald to say, no, we want a referendum, and that's a pretty serious thing. Again, it's undermined the authority of the Chief Minister. It's trying to give identity to Tynwald as a body, having a mind. In bigger jurisdictions, that's achieved by having a political party in charge and a Prime Minister. And it's difficult for us to get to that point, but there has to be something in place that people can say, we want our say, or this is what we believe, or you weren't listening. All those things are sort of lost in the woodwork at the moment, and I can't think of a better method for ensuring a referendum happens, particularly for a Chief Minister who feels that there's real conflict in the system, but either at Council of Ministers level or Tynwald level, that can't necessarily resolve itself. That the Chief Minister could intercede at that stage. I mean, I think I said it before, the Chief Minister should be able to, I say interfere, but interject his view that this goes to a referendum. It could be a private member's bill. It isn't necessarily something at Council of Minister level.
What do you think, Mr. Ramsay?
Just talking about the Chief Minister, I think the most remarkable thing about the Chief Minister is that they are appointed without any reference whatsoever to the public of the Isle of Man. Absolutely staggering. And the fact that some members probably even now are possibly talking amongst themselves about who should be the next Chief Minister, and the public are completely excluded from that. They can't even ask them candidates at election time because the excuse is, well, we don't know who's standing. I think it's a complete charade, actually, and actually disrespectful to the public, so almost insulting.
So the two choices are: do you have a directly elected Chief Minister? And the answer to that is no.
I'm not sure.
Well, that's a whole debate in its own right.
It's quite interesting that you say that, actually, Mr. Robertshaw, because your proposal would essentially allow a Chief Minister to govern by plebiscite. But if the Chief Minister hasn't been elected by the public, you then have an unelected Chief Minister governing by plebiscite. Because every time it gets tricky, he goes out for a referendum and gets the public's view, and then he goes back to his Council of Ministers or to Tynwald and says, look, this is what the public want. How dare you go against the wishes of the public? So actually you end up with a presidential system almost by default, but you're not advocating that the person with that power should be elected by the public in the first place.
No, I absolutely don't, because I think we could be in great danger of having too much power vested in a Chief Minister, and that could destroy everything. The concept of support by... And remember, a Chief Minister is not necessarily taking something to the people because he wants a yes. It could be a yes or a no. It's opening democracy up, and it's, instead of having an elected member at the beginning, the Chief Minister is actually testing his or her position constantly, right? Not constantly, but a few times a year, right the way through the administration. It would be a very refined and interesting responsibility to have that authority imposed upon a role. But if you think about it, the Chief Minister brings him or herself down very quickly if he misuses, he or she misuses that responsibility. I don't know any other way to link the process on an ongoing basis with the electorate in a way that protects all the interests of all the various parties, but certainly not absolutely not directly elected. Gosh, no.
Mr. Ramsay, is there anything that you'd like to add about your suggestion?
No, I would just say I'm not convinced about direct election of the Chief Minister, but I think it's well worthy of consideration. And if that isn't the answer to the democratic disconnect, which is the fundamental problem here, then what is? Again, including the referenda option, growth of parties, is that going to happen? All island constituency, probably not, wouldn't work. But, so, you know, I mean, one of the things that was discussed a couple of years ago was that maybe requiring chief ministerial candidates to declare themselves earlier on, so you knew who was in the running, so you could then ask your Keys candidate, who would you vote for? But of course that seemed to kind of preempt the outcome of the constituency process, and you can see why people would shy away from that. But there has to be a way around it somehow or other.
I still think that the key should be deciding who the Chief Minister is. I think that I can't see a way around that at all.
Well, arguably a party structure keeps the constituency connection with local MHKs, but also has the ability at least to give your government a popular mandate. And you would know who the Chief Minister was going to be, because arguably it would be one of the leaders of the various parties that gets themselves a popular mandate in the first
absolutely.
place.
I mean, everything we say here in Future IOM is neutral to the concept of whether parties develop or not. I mean, parties developing in no way interferes with these principles.
And whether or not a party political culture will properly take root in the Isle of Man remains to be seen. But I think what we could have as an interim step would be candidates forming kind of groupings around particular issues. So, for example, if you were a small government person, you might have a charter that says, we believe in smaller government. You're not talking about a party, but that's a principle that you're signing up to. If you're concerned about the future of the NHS in the Isle of Man, which a lot of people are, you have that kind of principle that you could, as an independent candidate, you could subscribe to. We believe in a fully functioning, fully funded, properly functioning National Health Service. And that would give you a couple of anchors for the kind of general election debate to operate around.
Do you not think that because of the way our system works, you would inevitably end up with 128 candidates all agreeing to all of those principles, because they're all very broad brush, and actually no one can really argue with the idea of a smaller government? Where you get the disconnect is then when you say, well, what does that mean in practice, a smaller government? You want to reduce the size of the civil service? Do you want to stop delivering particular services? Do you want to reduce the size of the benefit? That's where you start getting the ums and ahs and the questions.
I think
Do you run the risk that with your broad policies, even the ones you've just outlined, everybody would support them? And actually that doesn't then place any air gap between any of the candidates.
I'm not sure that even in the Isle of Man, candidates would be able to subscribe to both smaller and bigger government.
I believe they would and do on a regular basis.
Yeah, but maybe that's another idea worth exploring, that, in terms of principles, and Mr. Robertshaw's idea about unified government, you could have a charter that says, I'm signing up to this. Give a bit of structure to the debate, which is kind of currently without shape or form.
Who would you envisage would do that? Who would be the one setting out, actually, these are the 5 big issues in this election, these are the things we want candidates to comment on? I mean, typically on the Isle of Man, that's done by the media. They tend to be the ones going out saying, what do you think about these 5 issues? But how would you envisage that working if you were trying to devise a kind of non-party way of grouping candidates to get a feel for where they might stand on any issue? Who would you recommend would be the ones setting those issues out?
And media has an important role, but then equally I think you get kind of campaign groups evolving and coalescing around particular issues of concern, national issues of concern. And you could see, I mean, that that if you could call it the progressives out there, that might include a couple of the existing parties and kind of other people, that they might come together to say, we're not a party, but we believe in these 3 things. We've signed the whatever you want to call it. I don't know.
Can I ask, we've talked an awful lot about some of the problems. I mean, talked about the solutions as well, but we've talked about some of those problems that have existed in high-level strategic and things, particularly around projects. But was there anything or anything that you can point out where the process has been correct in leading to properly challenged policy that has then been developed out and implemented in the right way?
An example of success.
Yes. I'm trying to be positive.
I'm sure there must be. Let's be really kind here. I'm sure the good decisions are so good that we hardly notice them. I suppose that's the best dodge I can think of.
As a former journalist, I'm focused entirely on negatives.
Do you not think
not anymore?
Do you not think that in and of itself is part of the problem, though? That actually, whenever we have a public discourse about the way government functions, the way the ministerial, whatever it may be, we always talk about the negative.
Yeah.
You don't very often get people sat around going, well, that worked really well. Well done, Tybalt, you did a good job there. You don't very often
They're
get that.
terrified of complacency, aren't they? But no, I think you need a balanced evaluation of a subject.
I think I've tried to be critical of the problems, but in my opinion, provide the solution. So I think that's a positive sort of way of looking at things. Let's solve problems and let's make our system, which is sort of, if you compare us, for example, to the UK at the moment, or even Scotland with messes they're getting themselves into, and so on and so forth. We've got the basis of improvement. I just want us to see us do those improvements, We've had 40 years of experience of it in certain areas going wrong. Let's put it right and let's be proud of our system.
I was just going to say, I mean, just in terms of policy successes, but this isn't a government one, it was a parliamentary exercise, and that was the equalisation of the constituencies, which I didn't think would ever happen, but it did, and it seemed to be a step towards greater fairness, and it was a pretty obvious problem that needed addressing. And that, I thought that was a very positive step. Obviously not everyone would agree with that,
But a well-evidenced step is what you're saying, am I right?
yeah, they seem to get the process right. They started by tying Tynwald into certain principles without necessarily going to the implications of those, and then kind of got them into a corner, really, which I thought was quite clever.
So just for clarity, you're proposing we hoodwink Tynwald members?
No, not at all. It's enjoyable, but I
You
would
and your
recommend
leading questions. I'll in your time in office, Mr. Robertshaw, you obviously made a number of attempts to try and reform and better the ministerial system through the position that you were placed in as well as a minister. Why didn't they succeed? What was it?
It didn't. Well, it didn't succeed because it becomes very easy for a minister to enjoy the authority of being a minister and having a sort of 1,000 people saying yes minister, no minister, and it's a hard thing to as it were give up if you don't quite get what the refinements that I've sort of suggested. Incidentally, the refinements I was suggesting at the time did not include referendum. I hadn't got that far. I was preoccupied with why we should adopt the unified government approach, because I'm completely against that. But what I was saying to ministers was, you know, the department will not be all anymore. The power and the authority of that department will diminish, and I think we were all men, you know, all liked the authority that we had in those positions. And I stepped down simply because I knew that at that stage I was absolutely not going to move forward, and I wasn't going to live a lie just being in the ministerial role. So I stepped down, and I was very, very happy, the idea of departing at the end of that house. But I then got a sense of guilt that I thought I knew what was fundamentally necessary. And so I put forward the Little Green Book of Government Reform and refused to discuss anything around the constituency when I knocked on doors other than, do you agree or not agree with this Green Book? And I thought they'd say no, and that would be me free then, because I could always say yes, but look what I said. And they put me back. So I spent my time in the second house trying to do what I could to develop and enhance the concept of constructive opposition in the form of the policy review committees, of which you guys are actually one now.
Which is something that I think that yourself and Mr. Ramsay will agree on, is that sort of step back away from government to have a more bird's eye view on scrutiny, parliamentary scrutiny. Am I right?
It's
to ask a leading question myself.
No, I think the if you want a positive example, it's the formation of the policy review committees, because if you go back before then, we just had select committees that opened, said their stuff, and collapsed again, and there was no continuing culture of ongoing knowledge in the system, which I hope to God the policy review committees have achieved. And I think that if you look back over the years, the policy review committees have done some really good work in some areas. I think that's a really good step forward. Yeah.
Is that something that you can agree with, Mr. Ramsay?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
It's come to the point where I'm to ask you both if there's anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about.
No.
Oh, Mr. Ramsay.
No, I think we've given that a good thrash, as the late Norman Radcliffe used to say.
Other than to thank you for spending the whole, goodness knows, last 2 hours or so listening to us, and appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Really, really helpful. Thank you very much for the time that you've put into this. The committee will now sit in private.
Thank you very much.